Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of ReTFOS, where I take old stories I've narrated and update them to modern audio standards. This particular story is called Killing It, written by LgFatherAnthrocite. There was no longer any doubt. After the second trial, with the same results, no one could deny it any longer, not even the Galathi. The creature standing in front of them was sapient. It was hard to believe. No one wanted to believe it, especially the Galathi. Their claim to the planet was null and void. All the resources they had expended were forfeit to the natives of the planet. Moreover, as a sapient species who had made contact with the Federation, they were technically allowed to petition for protection and membership, petitions that were never denied. The findings were submitted within the seconds of the second trial's results being made public. Earth, as the locals called their planet, was surprisingly adept at navigating the bureaucracy of the millennia-old Federation. As it turns out, they had an entire profession dedicated to such things. Two, in fact. Something called a lawyer, which focused on written bureaucracy, and their socio-political counterparts, the politician. They had demanded a trial to determine sapience. After passing a long and arduous series of tests and procedures, the Galathi had demanded a second and even more stringent reassessment, something that was allowed, but an option that had only been exercised a few times in the history of the Federation. It was understandable that the Galathi were reluctant to accept the results. The raw materials and supplies they had flown to Earth as part of their expansion and colonization were now property of the planet that they had been dumped on. The financial loss was almost as bad as the loss of a place to put the colonists. The Galathi were approaching critical population limits on their current worlds, and Earth was to supply them with an arable land for growing and a place for the dispossessed of their worlds. In light of the findings of the Federation, they would have to accept the loss of not only resources, but a place to put several million people. Minutes after the petition for protection and membership was filed and automatically accepted, as was the tradition of the Federation, the Republic of Earth filed more petitions with the Federation. When the Galathi heard what the petition was for, they immediately assumed that it was some sort of trick. The humans were petitioning for an exchange with the Galathi, an exchange for one standard FTL cargo vessel of the lowest size along with the manuals for maintenance and upkeep. The humans would be willing to provide land to house and support 2 million Galathi, and return any unused portions of the remaining resources the Galathi had left on Earth. The politicians and lawyers worked together with the Galathi government to determine which lands would be good for the Galathi to inhabit. They determined that while the Galathi of Earth would be under Earth jurisdiction, they would be treated as Galathi citizens. Earth would get a 10% share of any resources to be shipped off-world as a tax. The number of colonists was less than originally intended, so the excess materials that were delivered to Earth were returned, and 2 million Galathi were allowed to inhabit marshlands and wetlands in various places across the globe. The cargo ship is what the humans were after. They had not come to the Federation as most of the other member species had. Instead of being contacted after making their first FTL flight, humans were instead thrust upon the galactic stage due to the preponderance of random circumstances, long-standing presumption, and bad timing, as they were technically a pre-FTL civilization. The ship was to be a blueprint from which they would learn the basics of FTL engine construction. Once the ship was delivered, the settlers were moved to places like the Everglades and the Louisiana Bayou, as well as the Polistovo-Lavaskaya swamp and a stretch of the Amazon. After the settlers were given aid setting up, and protections were put in place to ensure their safety, Earth turned its attention to the cargo vessel. The ship was stripped down, and every system was documented, diagrammed, analyzed, and, in at least 24 separate occasions, run through a scanning electron microscope. Whole new industries sprung up as exotic new processes were developed based on the influx of material sciences data. Within 5 years, the Galathi were established on Earth, and Earth had built its first test engines for FTL travel. There were, of course, roadblocks, obstacles, and setbacks. Many in the Federation felt that the automatic admission of a pre-FTL race was a slap in the face. Many didn't trust the humans, who had only a loose world government. there were many places that considered the Galathi invaders. Thankfully, the Terran Council had not located any Galathi in those territories. Earth, for its part, tried to keep its head down and not cause any issues. It collected its 10% tax on resources the Galathi exported, and stockpiled information and resources based on the new influx of technologies that was slowly permeating the borders between the Galathi encampments and the human neighbors. After 10 years, Earth had a more solidly developed planetary government. They had also managed to make a handful of FTL engines, many of which were used in-system to do things like gather raw materials from an asteroid belt and deliver them to the Moon and Mars when new colonies were being established. After 50 years, the Galathi were, for the most part, accepted as fellow Earth residents. They were, like the people of Earth, diverse in their interests. Drag races, amusement parks, nature preserves, music concerts, movies, bookstores. In any place that you would find a human pursuing a passion, you were just as likely to find a Galathi. Colleges, in particular, were rife with not only Galathi, but other Federation races, as Earth had instituted a new cultural exchange program, where students were allowed to come to spend a semester at an Earth college, if human students were allowed to do the same in return. It had proved to be very popular, as youth were always more curious and adventurous than the older, more established members of society. After a century of hosting multiple alien species and collecting the many resources of both the Galathi residents' export tax and the now easily collectible asteroids, Earth and her colonies were a net exporter of raw materials to the galaxy. 50 years of exchange study with many other Federation races had left the Earth with a fair amount of talented individuals from many places, as well as a fair number of citizens abroad. Students who took part in the exchange program were highly valued and often went on to have outstanding careers in their fields. For the better part of 500 years, Earth was slowly but surely building its reputation in the Federation. They were quick to offer aid and often went beyond the typical protocols of the Federation to engage in cultural exchange. They were the first species to put together a traveling cultural exhibit. They loaded a few ships with an orchestra and an acting troupe, classic works of cinema, compads with thousands of literary works, and reproductions of famous artworks. The ship would spend a year in a Federation-membered territory, visiting planets, putting on concert performances for a few months, selling compads full of literature, host art exhibits, and play performances. After a year, the ships would come home and restock. Members of the crew who wanted to leave were replaced. There were only ever a handful. Being able to travel the galaxy and see so many different places was a dream for many. After a millennium, Earth was the home world of 17 colonies, had one of the most diverse populations at any Federation planet, was considered a leader in cultural and educational fields, and ran one of the largest and most expansive aid programs in the galaxy, providing financial aid to college-bound students on any Federation planet, disaster recovery services, and charitable aid to newly founded colonies. They were one of the most respected, accepted, and beloved of all Federation races. The Galathi in particular were staunch allies, and had never forgotten how Earth had helped them when they were on the verge of catastrophic population issues. One day, 1,000 years after that fateful day, when Earth had made its petition to the Galathi, the Federation representatives of the two races were meeting for an informal lunch. The Galathi rep, over a salad of Earth-grown Galathi Merrick Reed, asked his counterpart, "Why, all those centuries ago, do you think your people made such a proposition to us? You were well within your rights to simply take the resources we left and turn away from us." "Well, I have heard, and mind you, this is hearsay, that we were completely underdeveloped as the race compared to the others in the Federation. We were allowed in based on a technicality that was rarely exploited. We couldn't hope to defend ourselves if anyone chose to attack." The human rep took a bite of his Merrick, and after a moment said, "Far better you consider us a benign, somewhat backwards benefactor than as selfish or self-righteous. So we fell back on an old Earth axiom: kill them with kindness." End of story. I would just like to thank the T5 supporters: Bushmaster117, Caspar Arnholtz, Draxzoon WRE, Elijah Silvercross, Gray, John Carrington, and Severin Cerberus. Thank you very much.